Hi fight fans, this is my thoughts on Anthony Joshua versus Gary Cornish. Now my various thoughts beforehand you may have heard on my videos that I think Joshua's going to go out there and blast out Gary Cornish in 2 rounds. He might still go out there and blast Cornish out there in 2 rounds. But I went back and take a look at Gary Cornish. Now he's unbeaten, so when you've got an unbeaten record, you have an element of belief that you're immortal. Almost, you believe that you cannot be beaten in the ring. Also, you should feel being an unbeaten fighter. Now, that goes for both fighters, Anthony Joshua and Gary Cornish. First time Gary Cornish, he's fighting his first real opponent, live opponent in Anthony Joshua. And likewise, so they're both fighting live opponents. Live meaning unbeaten, coming with the will to win. Now, I think Gary Cornish could have swerved Anthony Joshua. I don't think he had to take this fight, but he's taken the fight. Now, when I first looked at Gary Cornish and just glimpses of him at the press conference, when I saw of him, he looked nervous, he looked anxious, Then I went back and I listened to an interview of him afterwards, and he's like he arrived in from Scotland 4 hours delayed, so he looks rushed. So I looked at his body language again when he like shook hands with Joshua and they stood face to face. And it was interesting. Cornish came with his body language was to move forward when Joshua kind of stepped back. Cornish moved his body forward again, and Joshua pulled himself back. Like, you know, so the impression I was getting is that Cornish is going to come and give it a go. There's no doubt he's going to come and give it a go. And a wounded man is a dangerous man. So, as much as say that, I'll continue by saying that if Cornish comes out all guns blazing, he's 6'7", he's a solid, bona fide heavyweight that can punch. Anything can happen. And I would also have to add that Cornish has gone past 3 rounds. He's gone the distance, but he's gone more than 3 rounds in long fights. So he's done that. So he hasn't blown everybody out of the water. As for Anthony Joshua, he's done everything that could have been asked of him as an amateur turned pro. Some people would have him fight Vladimir Klitschko tomorrow. That's hype. One of the things I don't like to hear in boxing is when you start calling people beasts. When you call a person a beast, I would call Kovalev a beast because he's beating up and knocking guys out who are world ranked and are legitimately good fighters, former world champions and champions who may be unbeaten, i.e. the way he walked through Nathan Cleverly, the way he beat up Jean Pascal, the way he beat up Hopkins. These are guys in their own era and their own little bit of their own corner are top fighters. Forget Kovalev, and Kovalev has gone in and destroyed them. And and you could see with a bit to spare. And I think that's what I would call a beast, Kovalev, the way he goes about his business and destroys opponents. You could say Vladimir Klitschko is a beast in his own way because of what he does at the highest level. That's how you got to judge a guy, from the highest level, not at the lowest level or on a prospect level. You can't call a guy a beast from prospect level. You've got to call a guy a beast from, the top level, because if he's destroying people at the top level, then you've got a real beast. Anybody can knock guys over at coming in and beginning the sport, learning their trade. But to do it against the top fighters in the world who are throwing punches back, who are trained and dedicated to the craft to a point where they're skilled enough to survive or to stay at the highest level, that's different. And Kovalev and people like Vladimir Klitschko need to be given all the credit in the world. There are other fighters as well, but these are 2 guys that I've mentioned in particular. So the hype around Anthony Joshua, which is understandable, Olympic gold medalist, but we're yet to see. There's some things that Anthony Joshua still has to do for me. I'm not saying he's not a good fighter. He's a good fighter. But there are things he hasn't done. He hasn't gone past 2 or 3 rounds in a fight, I think. So he hasn't done that. He hasn't needed to because he's blown away the opposition. That just shows how either how good he is or how poor the opponent is, depending on how you're looking at it. That's even if you're pulling for Joshua or you're against Joshua. That's that. But he's done everything that's been asked of him. He's gone forward, he's threw his punches, he's dropped the guys, he's knocked the guy out. There's more you can ask Anthony Joshua. And so far, so good. We're yet to see what he's like when he gets hit back on the chin against a puncher. Cornish could throw punches back and he could hurt Joshua. We're yet to see Joshua be pushed back in a fight and being pushed back and having to think in a fight. We've never seen Joshua having to think and change his style up. Maybe because he's getting hit with a certain punch repetitively, or maybe he's been caught and dropped in a fight and he's had to get up and change style and tactics. He's never had to come from behind in a fight. He's never been put into a dogfight. So you can't really say this guy's a beast. He's just a very good on-top fighter at the moment. But when he's been put back against the ropes, when he's got a guy who's jabbing him in his face and his jab's not landing, when he's getting frustrated in the fight, when he's getting hit back and hurt in a fight, what happens when he's hurt or he's cut in a fight? How does he respond to these things? Because eventually at the highest level, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's happened to the greats. It's happened to Ali. It's happened to Tyson. It's happened to Holyfield. It's happened to Rocky. It's happened to them all. They've all either been dropped or hurt or cut or been in a tough fight. A guy who hasn't been able to move has been able to shift and kept going. Okay? Can Gary Cornish do that? That's the question. Anybody the size and the height of Gary Cornish, and he has got some knockout power there, can cause problems. And Cornish looks like he's going to come and bring the fight. I thought Cornish was going to get on the back foot and run. I think Cornish's best chance is to actually jump on Joshua and try and hit him early with something. And there was something else I noticed in Cornish's interviews. If you go back and listen to his interviews, he seemed annoyed because they kept saying how great Anthony Joshua was and belittling his own achievements. And I think he was frustrated. He knows that he is not he's the B-side in this. He knows that, and everyone will accept that Cornish is the B-side. But with two guys going in the ring and going at one another, you'd think Anthony Joshua's got all the amateur experience he had behind him. Cornish only had a few amateur fights. So there's a huge amount of amateur experience there that Joshua will have. So he'll know more about distance and timing, quality sparring that Joshua would have had access to. That Cornish has said that he's had problems getting sparring in the past. All these are key factors in the fight. I did see some sparring with him and Marius Vac. That's good to see him sparring with Marius Vac again, but Marius Vac is not Anthony Joshua. Joshua, from where I look at it so far, and I don't like using the term, but at the moment he's muscular, he's big, he's strong. Seems to lift weights. He's got the Brunoism about him. Not the Lewis, the Brunoism. Because Bruno is a big, strong, powerful guy. I don't think Joshua hits as hard as Bruno. But I think Joshua is more flexible than Bruno. You see, when we found out about Bruno's limitations. And listen, don't knock Frank Bruno. Because Bruno had one of the best jabs in heavyweight boxing. And he fought the very best. And Bruno was only beat by the very best in the world. Bone Crusher Smith went on to be a world champion. Tim Witherspoon, world champion. Lennox Lewis, world champion. And Mike Tyson, world champion. So Bruno got beat by the very best. And let's get something straight as well. Lennox Lewis got knocked out by Oliver McCall. Bruno didn't get knocked out by Oliver McCall. So Bruno wasn't a bad fighter. Bruno's problems was second half of the fight when Bruno started getting tired because of so much muscle in his body. Lactic acid started to get in. And so I used to slow Bruno down and used to handicap Bruno in the second half of the fight. And of course, the other thing about Bruno is he didn't know how to recover. There was nothing wrong with Bruno's chin. His problem was he didn't know what to do when he got hit. And this is another thing. If you only are a fighter that's used to just going forward and knocking people over, when you start getting hit back, you don't know how to react. You don't know what to do. Unless you've been trained how to deal with that, the results end up the same. You get hit, you get hurt, you don't know what to do. Some fighters panic, so they go down, they rush and get up quickly. Other fighters, when they get hit, like Bruno, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to tie up. Later in his career, he tried to tie up, which is what helped him against Oliver McCall, because if he didn't learn how to tie up, he would have got knocked out by McCall as well later on in that fight. It was his tying up skills and a little bit of southpaw stuff he did as well. So There are a lot of questions about Anthony Joshua. I'm not sold on Anthony Joshua yet. He has potential, and that's just it at the moment. We have to see that potential manifest. Now, as for for Gary Cornish, one of the bad habits Gary Cornish has got is when he throws his jab, he doesn't bring it straight back to his chin. So when he jabs in a manner which you can come straight over the top with a right hand. And Joshua does hit hard. How hard at the top level, I don't know, but he hits hard enough. Oh, he knocked out Kevin Johnson. Well, the argument is that Kevin Johnson, he admitted himself that was his last run. So, I don't know. For me, I think it's an interesting fight. It's an intriguing fight. My initial thought was Joshua will blast that Cornish in 2 rounds. Yep, he will blast Cornish out of there in 2 rounds if Cornish stands there, gets petrified, and doesn't have big fight temperament. But he seems to have some of that Scottish blood running through him. He's they call him the Highlander. So even if his durability isn't the greatest, he'll come to fight. He'll come to give it a go, which is something that Anthony Joshua opponents haven't had so far. So I hope that all goes well for Anthony Joshua and he can get past Gary Cornish. But if this fight goes into 4, 5, 6 rounds, I want to know how all those big muscles on Joshua work in the later rounds of the fight. I also want to know what Joshua looks like when he's pushed back. And I want to know what Joshua looks like when he's get hit on the chin and he's hurt. How does he respond? And until those tests or those criteria have been passed, I can't honestly turn around and say to you, this guy's going to be the next world heavyweight champion. You need to have those acid tests. You really don't want him against someone like Gary Cornish, to be honest with you. But if Cornish jumps on Joshua and hits him on the chin early, who knows? Joshua is the favourite in this fight, and I can understand, and I would totally go with Joshua in this fight. But when you have a guy that's still a prospect, you don't know what can happen. He has the quality, he has the skills, he has the ability to possibly go on to be world champion. Possibly. But at this moment, he's still prospect level. And as for Gary Cornish, he might be the guy that answers the questions before the Dillian Whyte fight. But then again, he might be the guy who gets knocked over in 2 rounds and Joshua learns nothing. Good thing about this, Joshua's fighting a guy that's taller, long reach. How does he get past the jab? How does he deal with that? The other question is, how does Joshua respond when he gets hit with a right hand? If you get hit early in a fight, you may not be so gung-ho to come rushing in. If that's the case, that may change the fight altogether, because if you're getting pinged with a good jab and a hard right hand, you may think, you know what, I'm not going to rush in the same way. So it may take Joshua a few rounds to work out Gary Cornish. Cornish has got a great stamina and great fitness, but he's under the lights in a huge event. Will he be intimidated by Joshua? That's the other question. But this is going to be a great fight, I think. I think it's going to be a real good fight. Let me know what you guys think. I'm out.